My father gave my son a broken toy for Christmas and said, "The real gifts are for family." My son started crying while the other kids snickered. 20 minutes later, I ended their little party. All right, Reddit, what you're about to read is real messed up. My parents disrespected my adopted son and made it clear he wasn't family, so I handled it in a way they never imagined. Grab your popcorn and enjoy this train wreck. I'm Charlotte, 36, female, run a logistics company now, and I've got this kid named Matthew, who's basically the only good thing I've ever done with my life. But let me back up because the story doesn't start there. 3 years ago, I was grinding 80-hour weeks at my parents' distribution company in Charlotte. I say my parents' company, but really I was the one running it while my dad played golf and my older sister, Grace, took credit for everything. Classic family business BS, where the person doing the actual work gets a salary and the people whose names are on the building get the equity. Anyway, I'm at this networking thing, one of those forced corporate mixer situations with bad drinks and people pretending their business cards matter. I'm talking to this woman, Angela, who runs a foster care nonprofit, just making conversation, and she mentions this kid, 8 years old, been in 4 homes in 3 years, and nobody wants him because he's got behavioral issues. I'm like, what kind of issues? And she's like, he talks back and doesn't smile enough. And the foster parents want a kid who's grateful 24/7, not a real human child with feelings. Basically, the kid was smart and angry and black, and white foster families in Charlotte kept sending him back because he wouldn't play the role they wanted. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I'd had too much of the bad drink, but I heard myself go, what if I fostered him? Angela looked at me like I'd just offered to juggle chainsaws, started asking if I was serious, if I understood what I was signing up for. All that. I was single, worked constantly, lived in a house that was basically just a place I slept between shifts. Made 0 sense. But let me tell you the only thing that did. I can't make kids. No need to go into details, but yeah, part of me wanted a son so bad. And something about this felt right. So yeah, I said I was serious. 3 months of paperwork, background checks, home visits, and classes on trauma-informed parenting later, Matthew moved in. The kid showed up with 1 garbage bag of clothes and this look on his face like he was already planning his escape route. The first night, he sat at my kitchen table with his arms crossed, waiting for me to lay down all the rules. I told him there was one rule. Don't lie to me, and I won't lie to you. Everything else we'd figure out. He tested that rule approximately 1,000 times in the first month. Broke a lamp and admitted it. Failed a math test and showed me the grade instead of hiding it. Every time I kept my word, didn't yell, didn't punish him for being honest, just dealt with whatever the actual issue was. Slowly, the kid started to believe me. Started to relax. Took about a year before he stopped flinching when I walked into a room too fast. Took 2 years before he started calling me Mom instead of my first name. And honestly, I started loving the little guy. By that point, I knew I was keeping him. Not fostering, keeping. So I started the adoption process. More paperwork, more home visits, more people asking me intrusive questions about my life. But the March before last, it was official. Matthew Sutton, my son, legally, permanently. Now here's where it gets complicated. See, my parents, Jacob and Pamela Sutton, built their distribution business back in the 90s. Self-made money, country club members, the whole thing. They are the kind of people who talk about family values while treating their employees like garbage and cutting every corner they can find. When I told them I was fostering Matthew, my mom did this thing where she forced a smile, then asked if I'd really thought it through, if I understood the challenges of raising a child from that kind of background. My dad straight up asked if I was trying to make some political statement. I should have seen it coming, but I kept thinking they'd come around once they met him. They didn't. My sister Grace was even worse. She's got these twin daughters, Ashley and Madison, 11 now, and she's raising them to be exactly like her, which is terrifying. First time she met Matthew, she did that thing people do where they talk slower and louder, like he's hard of hearing. I don't know if you got it. Matthew, who was 9 and reading at a 6th grade level, looked at me and went, "Is she okay? Should we call someone?" I almost lost it trying not to laugh, but the pattern was clear from day one. My parents showed up to every single one of Grace's kids' events. Dance recitals, birthday parties, soccer games, you name it. They'd post about it on Facebook, send group texts about how proud they were. Matthew? They missed his adoption day, said they had a conflict, missed his 9th birthday because they were at some charity gala, missed his 10th birthday because, I don't even remember the excuse that time, missed every baseball game, every school event, every single thing that mattered to him for nearly 3 years. And yeah, I knew what it was. I'm not stupid. My parents are racist. Not the screaming slurs kind. They're too respectable for that. The polite kind. The kind that never says anything explicitly wrong, but somehow their black grandson is always invisible while their white granddaughters get trust funds. Grace's kids got new iPads, summer trips to Europe, private tutors. Matthew got forgotten. Meanwhile, I'm still working for my parents, running their company while they collect checks. I kept thinking if I just worked harder, proved myself more, they'd eventually treat him like family. Stupid, I know, but that's the thing about family dysfunction. You keep thinking this time will be different. Then this past December, Matthew asked if we could go to Grandma and Grandpa's for Christmas. He'd made them presents in art class. These painted picture frames. Spent weeks on them. Kept showing me his progress. The kid was so proud of them. I should have said no. Should have protected him from what I knew was coming. But he looked so hopeful. And I guess I was still holding out for some fantasy where my parents acted like decent human beings, so I said yes. And we went. And it was so much worse than I could have imagined. We showed up on Christmas morning. The house looked like something out of a catalog. Massive tree, decorations everywhere. Grace filming everything for Instagram. Ashley and Madison were already tearing through this mountain of presents. Nobody said hello to my son. My brother Kyle showed up late. He works in their accounting department, basically trapped in the same hell I was. He gave me this look that said, "You really thought this would go well?" Then the present time came around. The twins got iPads, designer clothes, jewelry, bikes, just piles of expensive stuff. Matthew sat there watching, being patient like always. I could see him trying to figure out which present under the tree might be his. Finally, my mom reached under the tree and pulled out this wrinkled package, handed it to Matthew without even looking at him. He opened it carefully. Inside was a broken action figure, some off-brand superhero thing with one arm missing and marker scribbled all over it. Clearly something one of the twins had broken and thrown away. Matthew just stared at it, and my dad, who'd already been drinking before noon, laughed and said loud enough for everyone to hear, he should be grateful for anything. The real gifts are for the real family. The room went quiet for a second. Then a few people laughed nervously. Even Grace's kids were smirking. Matthew's face just crumpled. He tried so hard not to cry, but I could see his eyes getting wet. That's when something broke in me. Not snapped. Broke like a bone. Clean and permanent. Kyle stood up and started yelling at them, told them they were disgusting, that they were humiliating a child. My dad told him to shut up. Grace rolled her eyes like Kyle was being dramatic. I put my hand on Matthew's shoulder and we walked out. He was shaking, started crying in the car, asking if maybe there was another present they forgot to give him. I told him, "No, buddy. That was it. That's what they thought he deserved." Kyle followed us outside, told Matthew to go upstairs where his kids were playing video games. Before Matthew went in, Kyle looked at me and said, "You should have burned this bridge years ago, sis." He was right. I went back into that living room. They'd already moved on, back to their perfect little Christmas. I picked up the 2 gifts I'd brought, $400 watch for Dad, a spa package for Mom, and put them back in my bag. My dad noticed, asked what the hell I was doing. I looked at all of them and said, "Merry Christmas, I'm done." They thought I meant I was leaving. I wasn't. I meant I was done with all of it. "I quit," I told them. My dad started to laugh like I was being dramatic. So I told them the rest, that I'd spent the last 18 months building something, that I'd secured a $1.2 million investment, locked down office space, recruited a team, that I was launching my own distribution company in direct competition with them, that I was going to bury them. Once the realization hit them, the room went dead silent. My dad's face went purple. My mom looked like she was going to collapse. Grace finally looked at me like I was an actual threat instead of her annoying little sister. I gathered up Matthew, hugged Kyle, thanked him, and left. Matthew fell asleep in the car. I carried him up to bed when we got home, Sat on the edge of his bed for a while, just hating myself for ever thinking my parents deserved another chance. Then I went to my office and wrote the resignation email. Sent it at 3:00 a.m. and felt nothing except relief. The first few days after Christmas were quiet. Too quiet, honestly. I kept expecting my phone to blow up, but nothing. Radio silence from all of them. Then about a week later, my mom texted me. Hope Matthew enjoyed his gift. It was just a little joke. You're being too sensitive. I stared at that message. A joke? A 10-year-old kid getting a broken toy while his cousins got iPads was a joke. I blocked her number and got back to work. My dad tried next from a different number. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. You'll come crawling back. I forwarded it to my lawyer and kept building. Here's the thing. I wasn't bluffing about the company. I'd been planning this for over a year, just waiting for the right moment. Guess my family handed me the perfect motivation on a silver platter. My investor was Vivian Miller, a woman in her 50s who'd built and sold 2 logistics companies already. She didn't mess around. When I pitched her on starting something from scratch, she looked at my financials for about 10 minutes and said, I'm in. Within 3 weeks of quitting, I had office space rented, a website live, and 8 employees ready to go. We called it Atlas Distribution Solutions because I'm not creative with names and Matthew likes Greek mythology. My operations manager was Jerome Williams, a guy who'd worked for my parents for 6 years before quitting. He'd called me about 2 months before Christmas and said he was looking for a new opportunity. When I told him what I was planning, he just laughed and said, When do I start? Later, he told me why he left my parents' company. My dad had called him articulate, like it was surprising. My mom kept asking if he was really the manager every time she didn't recognize him in the warehouse. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Jerome and I clicked immediately. He knew the industry inside and out, had relationships with vendors I'd never even heard of. And when I told him about what happened with Matthew at Christmas, he just nodded and said, Yeah, I've met your parents. Let's destroy them. By mid-January, we'd signed our first 8 clients. 3 of them were former clients of my parents who switched over after I reached out. Turns out a lot of people had been waiting for an alternative to Sutton Distribution. One guy, a warehouse manager I'd worked with for years, straight up told me, Everyone knew you were the one actually running that place. Your dad's an idiot. And my phone stayed quiet on the family front. No calls from Grace, no guilt trips from Mom, no threats from Dad, just nothing. Grace's Instagram told a different story, though. She started posting these vague quotes about betrayal and fake family, and people who stab you in the back. Real subtle. Then in late January, Matthew asked me something that made my chest hurt. We were eating dinner, and he said, Mom, do you think Grandma and Grandpa don't like me because I'm black? I put my pizza down, asked him why he thought that. He said, Because they're always nice to Ashley and Madison, and they look like them. But they're not nice to me, and I don't look like them. So I thought maybe that's why. 10 years old, and he'd already figured out what I'd spent nearly 3 years pretending wasn't happening. I didn't lie to him. I told him, Yeah, that's probably part of it. Some people have this broken thing inside them that makes them mean to people who don't look like them. It isn't your fault, isn't your problem, and definitely isn't your job to fix. He nodded like he'd already known the answer. Then he asked if I was mad at them for it. I told him I was furious, that they treated him like he didn't matter, and nothing made me angrier than that. He said, Good, I'm glad you're on my side. That night, after he went to bed, I sat on my back porch, thinking about how I'd let my parents treat my son like garbage for nearly 3 years, how I'd made excuses, kept hoping they'd change, kept exposing Matthew to people who didn't deserve to know him. That's when I decided being done with them wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel it, all of it. February hit and Atlas was thriving. We doubled our client base. Jerome was running operations perfectly. Our website was getting traffic. Word was spreading. A new company in town, good people, actually gave a damn about service quality. I hired a marketing director named Shanice Robertson. She was sharp as hell, had worked in corporate marketing for years, and wanted something with more autonomy. When I told her the backstory, that I was competing directly against my family's company, she grinned and said, Oh, we're going to have fun with this. She started a subtle campaign, just positioning Atlas as the ethical alternative. Our website emphasized transparency, fair treatment of employees, community investment, everything my parents' company claimed to be, but wasn't. Then I got an invitation in the mail. White envelope, gold trim, my mother's handwriting, formal card inviting me to a family dinner at their house. February 14th, Valentine's Day. Let's reconnect. Just immediate family. No apology, no acknowledgement of what happened. Interesting. Jerome saw it on my desk, asked what I was going to do. I told him I was thinking about it. He said, "If you go, I'm putting a wire on you because this is going to be good." I called Kyle that night. He'd gotten the same invitation. Said he wasn't planning on going until he heard something interesting. My parents' biggest client, a regional retail chain that represented about 30% of their revenue, had quietly ended their contract 3 weeks ago. That same client had reached out to me 5 days earlier asking about Atlas's capacity. I decided to show up, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted to see them squirm. February 14th was cold and rainy. I pulled up to their house around 6 o'clock, sat in the car for a minute, then walked in. My mother's face was all fake surprise and calculation. She'd dressed up, probably thinking I was coming to apologize. My father was already at the table with a drink in hand. Grace looked annoyed to see me. She'd clearly had a few drinks already. I didn't bring Matthew, obviously. Nobody asked about him. They didn't even mention his name. For 40 minutes, they made small talk. Dad talked about industry stuff. Mom bragged about their reputation. Grace showed photos of her kids, and I could tell her marriage was falling apart. Too much forced smiling, that desperate energy. Then the tone shifted. My father cleared his throat and did this whole speech about how they'd been reflecting, how they recognized my contributions, and how they wanted to make amends. He offered me a partnership. 30% equity, VP title, profit sharing. All I had to do was come back and put this unpleasantness behind us. My mom jumped in with the manipulation. Said they missed me, missed Matthew. First time she'd said his name all night. That families make mistakes but grow from them. Said Matthew was part of the family too, with this tone that made my skin crawl. I leaned back and asked, why now? After nearly 3 years of treating the kid like he's invisible, after humiliating him on Christmas, why the sudden change? They danced around it. Dad said something about timing. Mom said something about family bonds. So I gave them the truth. "You're bleeding clients," I said. "Your operations manager quit to join me. Your reputation's tanking, and you think I'm your life raft." My father's face went red. Started to say something, but I kept going. "That retail chain that just dropped you? They're signing with Atlas next week. 3 of your best people have already reached out about jobs. Word's getting around that Sutton Distribution is a sinking ship, and you need me to bail water." Grace scoffed. "You're delusional." So I pulled out an envelope from my jacket and slid it across the table. My father opened it, thinking it was some kind of agreement. It wasn't. It was a buyout offer. Not for me to join them, for them to sell me the entire company. $4.2 million. Clean exit. They could retire, save face, walk away before everything collapsed completely. Already backed by Vivian's investment group, already had client commitments. The silence was perfect. My father's hands were shaking. My mother went pale. Grace knocked over her wine glass and didn't even notice. Kyle walked in from the kitchen. He'd been there the whole time, listening. He sat down across from me and said, "That's more than generous considering what it'll be worth in 6 months if you don't take it." My father exploded, started yelling about betrayal, about destroying what he built, about me being an ungrateful piece of garbage, full narcissist meltdown. I just sat there and let him finish. When he was done, I said, "Everything you built was on my back. I fixed your mistakes. I built the relationships. I made this company functional while you played golf, and you couldn't even be decent to my son." My mother started crying. "What kind of daughter destroys her parents?" "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm offering you an exit before you destroy it yourselves." Grace finally found her voice. "You're vindictive, jealous. You couldn't handle my kids being more successful than Matthew." I laughed, actually laughed. "Your kids are 11-year-old trust fund babies who've never worked for anything. Matthew has more character in his pinky than both of them combined." She called me racist, actually played that card. Said I was obsessed with race and using Matthew to make some political statement. I stood up, told them they had 1 week to consider the offer. After that, the price dropped $500,000 and kept dropping every week after that. Kyle followed me out. At my car, he said, "I'm putting in my notice tomorrow. You got room for a CFO?" I told him to send his resume. He said, "I'll do you one better. I've got copies of their financials for the last 5 years. Thought you might want to see what you're buying." That's when I realized Kyle had been planning this longer than I had. Monday morning, the silence broke. My father called at 7:40 a.m. I didn't answer. Around noon, my mother texted, "Can we talk? Just you and me. No business." I left her on read. That night, Grace posted an Instagram story that was clearly about me. Some quote about snakes in the grass. Her friend commented, "Stay strong, girl," with prayer hands. I screenshotted it and sent it to my lawyer with a note. Exhibit A. Tuesday brought the first real escalation. Jerome called around 10 o'clock a.m., sounding pissed. Said he'd gotten a call from someone claiming to do an employment verification. They'd asked weird questions. Had he ever seen me be violent? Did I have substance issues? Concerns about my stability? He told them to screw off and hung up. The message was clear. My parents were trying to dig up dirt. I called my lawyer, Stephen. He said we had grounds for cease and desist, but advised waiting, documenting everything, letting them keep digging their own grave. Wednesday, things got personal. Matthew's school called me at work. Said someone claiming to be family had called asking about Matthew's schedule, pickup authorizations, custody concerns. The school followed protocol and called me immediately. When I got there, the principal showed me the notes. The caller identified herself as Grandmother Sutton and said I was unstable and she was concerned for the child's safety. That's when I stopped being patient. That's when I decided to go nuclear. I called Stephen, told him everything. He said, "We've got more than enough for a restraining order and defamation suit." But I wanted more. I wanted them to feel what it's like when someone comes after your kid. Stephen asked, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Dismantle them piece by piece." Here's the thing about working at your parents' company for 15 years. You know where all the bodies are buried. Late payments to contractors, questionable tax deductions, non-competes that wouldn't hold up, OSHA violations at the warehouse, payroll errors that always favored the company. I'd been covering those tracks for years. Now they were ammunition. Kyle came through. He'd been quietly documenting everything for months. Brought me a thumb drive with 5 years of financial records, internal memos, email chains. I sat with Stephen, Vivian, and Jerome going through it all. Vivian looked at me and said, "How aggressive do you want to be?" I thought about Matthew crying on Christmas, thought about my mother calling his school. "I want them to understand what happens when you come after my kid," I said. We built the strategy over the next week. Step 1. Stephen sent a comprehensive cease and desist to all 3 of them. Outlined every instance of harassment, included documentation, warned that any further contact would result in immediate legal action. Step 2. I filed complaints with the Department of Labor about OSHA violations at their warehouse. Nothing fatal, but enough to trigger an inspection that would cost them time and money. Step 3. I reached out to 4 of their remaining major clients. Not to poach, just to have conversations about the industry, about Atlas's approach. I never mentioned my parents. Didn't need to. 3 switched to Atlas within 2 weeks. The 4th started asking my parents uncomfortable questions. But I saved the best for last. One client my parents could not afford to lose, a manufacturing company in Colombia. They represented about 40% of Sutton Distribution's revenue. I'd built that relationship from scratch 8 years ago. The CEO was Frank Dalton. I called him, asked if he had time for lunch that weekend. He said, "Sure." Saturday, I drove down to Colombia. We talked about life, business. Eventually, he asked how things were going with my parents' company. I told him I'd left, started my own thing. He nodded like he'd expected it. Then he said, "Your old man called me 2 weeks ago. Tried to tell me you stole client lists and proprietary information. Said you were unstable. Said anyone doing business with you was taking a risk." I didn't say anything. Frank took a drink and said, "I told him I've known you for 8 years, and the only risk I see is continuing to work with someone who'd throw his own daughter under the bus." He pulled out a contract. "This is our current agreement with Sutton Distribution. Up for renewal in 30 days. I'd like to see a proposal from Atlas." I had the proposal to him in 48 hours. He signed 2 weeks later. That was $1.8 million in annual revenue that just walked away. And that was when I knew. I hadn't just beaten them. I'd finished what they started. March came in like a wrecking ball. In the first 10 days, my parents lost 3 more clients. Their head of logistics quit, the warehouse failed its OSHA inspection, and they got hit with fines. Grace's Instagram went from passive-aggressive quotes to full meltdown. She posted a long rant about fake people who stab their families in the back, then another about people who use children as props. That second one got a comment from her friend Jessica. "Girl, you watched your parents humiliate that sweet little boy on Christmas and said nothing. Look in the mirror." The comment stayed up for 2 hours before Grace deleted the whole post. I'd already screenshotted it. Matthew was thriving, by the way. Made the school baseball team, had solid friends, stopped asking about my parents. One night while we were playing video games, he said, "I'm glad we left that day." I asked why. He said, "Because now I know you're always going to pick me, and that feels good." 10 years old, dropping truth bombs like a therapist. Meanwhile, Kyle officially joined Atlas as CFO, bringing insider knowledge with him. My parents were bleeding money, losing clients faster than they could replace them. The buyout offer had been on the table for 3 weeks. No official response, but Kyle said there were heated arguments at the office. Mom wanted to take it. Dad refused to admit defeat. Grace was pushing them to fight, but nobody had a plan. Then came their counterattack. And look, I expected something desperate. I just didn't expect it to be that stupid. Someone filed a BBB complaint claiming Atlas engaged in false advertising and stole client lists. Anonymous, but Stephen traced it to an IP address registered to Grace's home. 3 employees got LinkedIn messages from a recruiter offering them jobs at Sutton Distribution with significantly improved compensation. All the messages came within an hour. All 3 employees forwarded them to me immediately. Jerome looked at the numbers and laughed. They were promising salaries the company couldn't afford. Then my father called Vivian directly, left her a voicemail that was supposedly about a business opportunity, but turned into a 2-minute rant about how I was a traitor and emotionally unstable. Vivian forwarded it to me with a note. "Your father just gave us a slam-dunk defamation case. Want me to send it to Stephen or savor it first?" I savored it for 30 seconds, then sent it to Stephen. But the 4th shot crossed the line. Someone called CPS, Child Protective Services, and filed a report claiming I was neglecting Matthew, that he was often left alone, that there were concerns for his safety. CPS has to investigate every report. The caseworker who showed up was professional, apologetic. She talked to Matthew, looked around, checked that he was fed and healthy and safe. She told me she could tell the report was malicious but still had to file paperwork. Before she left, she said, "Off the record, whoever called this referenced specific details only family would know. They mentioned the adoption, concerns about your ability to parent. I've done this job 12 years. This has all the hallmarks of a family dispute." After she left, I explained to Matthew what had happened. He asked if he was going to have to leave. I told him absolutely not, that someone lied to cause problems. He hugged me and said, "I know who called. It was them, wasn't it?" Smart kid. I didn't lie. I said, "Yeah, probably." He said, "Are you going to make them sorry?" I said, "Extremely sorry." That night I called an emergency meeting, Stephen, Vivian, Kyle, and Jerome. I laid out everything. Stephen said we had enough for restraining orders, a harassment lawsuit, possibly criminal charges if we could prove who called CPS. Vivian said, or we could just finish them off financially and let the market do the work. Why not both? I said. Kyle pulled up the financials, showed that Sutton Distribution was operating at a loss, burning through their cash reserves trying to compete. They had 2 major clients left, both unhappy with service. I asked if he could reach out to those clients. He said, "Already did. They're waiting for your call." Within a week, both switched to Atlas. Sutton Distribution was down to small regional accounts that barely covered operating costs. My father made one last desperate play. Called Frank Dalton, remember him, the CEO from Columbia, and offered to personally manage his account at a 30% discount. Frank said no. When my father asked why, Frank said, "Because your daughter answers her phone and your company keeps screwing up my shipments. Price isn't the issue, competence is." Frank called me laughing about it. "Your old man's losing his mind," he said. "Might want to finish this before he does something really stupid." I took his advice. April brought the endgame. Stephen filed a formal defamation lawsuit against my parents and Grace. False CPS report, interference with my business, the voicemail to Vivian. We weren't asking for huge money, just enough to hurt and create a public record. The local business community noticed. Some of their connections started distancing themselves. Grace's social media went dark. My mother started seeing a therapist, according to Kyle. Good. At this point, they all needed to. But the real blow came from Angela, the social worker who'd first told me about Matthew. She ran in some of the same nonprofit circles as my mother. After the CPS incident, Angela made some calls. She let it be known that my mother had filed a false report about an adopted child. In the adoption and foster community, that's about as low as you can go. My mother got quietly removed from 2 boards and uninvited from a major fundraiser. The social consequences hit harder than anything I'd done professionally. That was her world. The charity galas, the society pages, being a pillar of the community. Watching that crumble broke something in her. Mid-April, I got a call from an unknown number. It was my mother. Her voice sounded small, defeated. "I need to talk to you in person, please." I said I'd meet her in a public place with my lawyer present. She agreed. Coffee shop downtown. Wednesday afternoon. My mother looked like she'd aged 5 years in 4 months. Stephen sat next to me, recording everything. She started with an apology. Said she'd been reflecting, said she'd been wrong, said she let her discomfort with Matthew affect her judgment. Then came what she really wanted to say. "Your father wants to accept the buyout, but the price has dropped so much we can't afford to retire on it. We'd have to sell the house." I didn't say anything. She said, "I'm asking you as your mother to consider the original offer, for old time's sake." I looked at her and said, "You called CPS on my son because you were losing a business fight. You tried to have him taken away, and now you want me to do you a favor for old time's sake?" Her eyes filled with tears. Said she didn't make that call. Must have been Grace. I told her I didn't care which one did it. She'd enabled it. Stephen leaned forward. "Mrs. Sutton, my client's current offer is $2.1 million for the business and all assets, down from $4.2 million because of the loss in value. That offer expires in 72 hours. After that, Ms. Sutton can let the business collapse and buy the assets in bankruptcy for significantly less." My mother looked at me like I was a stranger. "This will destroy us," she said. "You destroyed yourselves," I said. "I just stopped propping you up." She left without another word. 3 days later, Kyle called. Said my father signed the buyout agreement, accepted $2.1 million. The lawyers would handle the transition. I asked how my father seemed. Kyle said, "Broken. Kept saying he built that company. It was his legacy." I told him, "He built it on your back and now you own it." Kyle just sat there on the other end. Neither of us said a word for a long time. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel bad about any of it. The transition took 6 weeks. I brought in a management team to integrate Sutton Distribution into Atlas. Kept some of the good employees, let go of the dead weight, rebranded everything. By June, it was like Sutton Distribution had never existed. My parents moved to a smaller house in a cheaper neighborhood. Grace stopped posting online completely. Kyle heard she and her husband Todd had separated. I didn't reach out, didn't gloat, didn't even think about it much. I just went on with my life, like they'd never been part of it. One night, Matthew asked, "Do you think Grandma and Grandpa are sad?" "Probably," I said. He thought for a moment. "Because people who do mean things end up sad?" "Exactly," I told him, "and that's not our responsibility to fix." He nodded. "Good. I'm glad they're not in our life anymore." "Me too, kid," I said. "Me too." By August, Atlas had grown beyond anything I'd imagined, expanded into 2 new states, hired 40 employees, and was on track to hit $8 million in revenue by year-end. Vivian was already talking about a second round of investment. Jerome was running operations flawlessly. Kyle had the financials tight and clean. And Matthew, starting 5th grade, trophy shelf full of baseball medals, straight A report card, said he wanted to be an engineer when he grew up. The kid was reading college-level math books for fun. One Saturday in late August, we were at the lake. Me, Matthew, Kyle and his kids, Jerome and his family, Vivian and her wife. A couple of boats, a cooler full of food, and hours of laughter. Matthew and Kyle's oldest were fishing off the dock when Matthew said, "This is better than Christmas at Grandma's house, right?" Everyone got quiet for a second. Then Kyle's kid, who'd been there that Christmas, said, "Dude, literally anything is better than that Christmas." We all burst out laughing. Jerome looked at Matthew and said, "Your mom won, little man. You both won." Later that evening, after everyone had left and Matthew was in bed, I sat out on the back porch with a glass of wine, staring at the lake as the sun went down. 9 months. That's all it had taken. 9 months to go from being their pawn to being free. From being the daughter they dismissed to the woman who owned everything they'd built. From being the mother of a not-real grandson to the mother of a boy who was loved, safe, and thriving. Some people might say I went too far. That family should forgive. That revenge doesn't heal. Those people never watched their child cry on Christmas because his grandparents gave him garbage while his cousins unwrapped iPads. Those people never had their own mother call CPS to try to take their son away. You come after my kid, I end you. Simple as that. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Almost deleted it, then saw the message. This is Angela. Hope you and Matthew are doing well. Heard what happened with your family. Wanted to say I'm proud of you for protecting him. Not enough parents do. I texted back, he's doing great, we both are. She responded, good, that's all I needed to know. I put my phone down and smiled. My parents had wanted me small, grateful, dependent, quiet. They'd wanted Matthew invisible. Instead, I built something bigger, something better. So yeah, I ruined their Christmas, and their business, and their retirement, and I'd do it again, without hesitation. Because nobody laughs at my kid. Nobody. It's been over a year now since everything went down. Life looks completely different. Not perfect, but peaceful in a way I never knew existed. Atlas is thriving. We just opened a new regional hub in Nashville, and I promoted Jerome to COO. Kyle's CFO now, officially, and his kids spend almost every weekend at my house. Vivian's still my mentor and occasional devil's advocate, always reminding me to scale smart and protect the culture. We're projected to cross $12 million in revenue by next quarter. But none of that compares to what's happening at home. Matthew's turning 11 next month. He's still obsessed with Greek mythology. Now he's reading the Odyssey and explaining the metaphors to me like a little professor. He joined a robotics club at school, made it to state competition, and when they announced his team as finalists, he looked over at me in the bleachers, eyes shining, like he still couldn't believe someone was there for him. Afterward, he hugged me and said, "We make a good team, huh?" "Yeah, kid, we really do." He doesn't talk about my parents anymore, not really. The last time their names came up was when his school asked students to write essays about family. He wrote about me, Kyle, Jerome, and Vivian, called us his found family. When I read it, I cried harder than I have in years. Sometimes I still drive past my parents' old house. It's smaller now, worn around the edges. The shutters need painting. The yard isn't perfect anymore. Grace lives a few towns over, working some consulting job. Her posts are all about healing energy and starting over, and maybe she really is trying. I don't wish her harm. I just don't wish her anything. My father? Kyle says he spends his days watching TV and drinking in silence. Mom's joined a new church group, trying to build back her image in a smaller pond. They haven't contacted me again since the day they signed the papers. I don't think they ever will. And that's okay. The world didn't end when I walked away from them. It started. I've learned something through all of this. Forgiveness isn't about letting people back in. It's about setting them down and walking away lighter. I forgave them, but only in the sense that I refuse to carry their poison anymore. A few weeks ago, Matthew and I were on the porch watching a summer storm roll in. He asked, "Do you think they ever think about us?" "Probably," I said. "Do you think they're sorry?" "Maybe," I told him. "But sorry doesn't fix who they are. You don't owe people like that space in your heart." He nodded, thoughtful, then said, "Good, I don't want to waste any space." That kid. Every time I think I'm teaching him something, he ends up teaching me instead. Later that night, I tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and stood there for a while, watching him breathe. Safe, happy, unbroken. All I ever wanted was for him to know he was loved, really loved, by someone who'd never make him feel small. And if I had to burn down everything that came before to give him that, then I'd light the match again. Every single time. Because that's what family is supposed to do. Protect, build, heal. And that's exactly what I did.